Being queen of ancient Egypt sounds like a dream. Golden thrones, divine power, a kingdom at your feet. But here's the truth. It was a trap. Behind every royal statue of a woman was a fight just to be seen as human. Because ruling as a female pharaoh wasn't rare, was nearly impossible. Ignored by priests, undermined by generals, erased by history. The crown was heavy and lonelier than any tomb. So if you're still with me, maybe you're already sensing it. This isn't the version from the textbooks. Tonight, we're peeling back the gold leaf to find the cracks underneath. Grab your blanket. Dim the lights. We're going back to a time of desert gods and sacred bloodlines, and stepping into the sandals of the women who ruled a world that swore they never could. Imagine a crown, not just any crown, but one heavy with meaning. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh's crown was far more than a decorative piece. It was a symbol woven tightly with power, divinity, and tradition. The famous double crown, called the Shent, merged the white crown of Upper Egypt with the red crown of Lower Egypt, embodying the unity of the land. This crown, with its rigid shape and striking colors, rested atop the head of the pharaoh, signaling absolute authority. Yet for a woman who wore it, the crown carried an unseen weight, far heavier than its physical form. The pharaoh was not merely a king or queen in the way we might think of royalty today. This ruler was considered a living god, a bridge between the earthly world and the divine. The role was deeply masculine in both conception and expectation. For centuries, Egypt's rulers had been men, and their images filled temples, tombs, and scrolls, all portraying the ideal of male strength and dominance. When a woman stepped into this role, she stepped into a story centuries in the making, a story that did not easily allow for her presence. Picture the crown's hard edges, its smooth surfaces catching the Egyptian sun, the way it might have felt balanced precariously on the head of a female ruler. The crown was crafted from sturdy materials, often gold or precious metals, cool to the touch but unforgiving in its weight. It pressed down with a silent insistence, a constant reminder that the pharaoh carried not only the realm's burdens, but also the expectations of tradition and gender. In this role, the female pharaoh was expected to embody qualities associated with kingship strength, decisiveness, and divine favor. But she was also measured against ideals of femininity. These conflicting demands created an internal tension that few could fully appreciate. The crown was a symbol of unity and power, but it also marked her as an exception, a challenge to established norms. The very act of wearing the crown brought the female pharaoh into a delicate balance between acceptance and scrutiny. Public ceremonies, rituals that echoed with the sound of chanting priests and the soft rustle of linen robes, were staged to affirm her divine right. Yet behind the scenes, doubt and resistance simmered among courtiers and officials accustomed to male leadership. The crown, shining bright and unyielding, seemed almost to isolate her from the world beneath it. Beyond the visible crown, the pharaoh's role included invisible weights, the gaze of a society rooted in tradition, the silent judgments of advisors, and the unspoken challenge of maintaining authority in a realm where female rulers were rare and often contested. It was a burden carried quietly, like the gentle but persistent pressure of the desert sun on a long journey. As the day faded into dusk, imagine the female pharaoh standing atop a palace terrace, the soft wind carrying the distant sounds of the Nile. The crown, still resting on her head, gleamed faintly under the last light, a reminder of her singular place in history. This weight, the crown's heavy symbolism, the complex expectations wrapped around it, was just the beginning of the challenges that awaited her. And so, with the weight of the crown settled upon her brow, the story of her reign unfolded, not just in grand displays of power, but in the quiet, often unseen struggles beneath the surface. The world of ancient Egypt was one deeply woven with tradition that shaped every moment of a pharaoh's day, every gesture, every decision. For centuries, these traditions had grown like roots, spreading quietly and firmly beneath the surface of daily life, supporting an order where roles were clearly defined, especially along the lines of gender. The pharaoh's role was central, yet it was also rigidly framed by these customs. Imagine the smooth stone walls of a temple, cool under the desert sun, their surfaces carved with figures of gods and kings. These images were not random, but deliberate of visual language, reinforcing the place of the pharaoh as a male figure, the embodiment of strength and stability. For a woman to stand in that position was to gently disturb this long-established pattern, a delicate ripple in waters long thought still. In the royal court, tradition dictated more than just public appearances. It shaped the very rhythm of life. The daily rituals of the palace were filled with symbolic acts, from the precise way incense smoke curled upward to the measured tones of prayers recited by priests. Every action, every look, was expected to reflect the idealized balance between order and power. Yet, these ideals were deeply masculine, steeped in centuries of custom where the king was the upholder of mat truth, justice, and cosmic order qualities almost always portrayed as male attributes. The female pharaoh was caught between two worlds, the need to uphold these masculine traditions and the reality of her own identity. Her presence in court was a quiet challenge to convention, observed carefully by courtiers whose loyalty often hinged on maintaining the status quo. The tapestry of daily life was thick with expectation, like the subtle scent of lotus blossoms drifting through palace corridors, pleasant yet persistent, a constant reminder of the roles carved out by generations before her. Ceremonies offered a stage where these expectations played out visibly. The female ruler was often shown performing acts traditionally reserved for men smiting enemies, leading processions, wearing the false beard of kingship. These rituals were not merely performance, but essential affirmations of legitimacy. Yet the tension between tradition and reality was palpable beneath the surface. The rituals had to convince not only the people, but also the divine forces that the pharaoh, regardless of gender, was worthy of rule. In private, the expectations could weigh heavily. The female pharaoh was expected to navigate the fine line between embodying the strength of a king and the grace expected of a woman. To the untrained eye, this might seem a mere balancing act, but in a society where every gesture was laden with meaning, it was an exhausting endeavor. The scent of scented oils, the feel of finely woven linens against her skin, all these details of royal life served as reminders of the roles she was expected to fulfill. Moreover, tradition extended beyond personal behavior to the ways the pharaoh's rule was recorded and remembered. Hieroglyphs, statues, and tomb paintings often depicted rulers in standardized ways, preserving a masculine ideal of leadership. Female pharaohs sometimes had their images adjusted, faces softened, beards added to fit this mold. Their stories, too, were told through the lens of male expectations, often muting the unique challenges they faced. In this world bound tightly by tradition, the female pharaoh was an exception, a quiet disturbance in a carefully ordered system. The roots of custom were deep, and the winds of change moved slowly in such a vast and ancient land. Her reign was not only a test of leadership, but a test of patience, of subtle resistance, and of enduring grace under scrutiny. As the day's ceremonies faded and the palace settled into evening calm, the weight of these traditions lingered in the shadows, soft but unyielding, shaping every choice and every breath. In the quiet moments between public duties, the female pharaoh was left to carry the heavy burden of expectations that reached far beyond her own time. And so, as tradition held firm, the story continued, one of quiet endurance beneath the gaze of a world not quite ready to see a woman as king. In the quiet chambers of the royal palace, power was never absolute, especially for a female pharaoh. The throne she occupied was more than a seat of authority. It was a precarious balance, a tightrope stretched across a deep chasm of expectations, alliances, and subtle resistance. Unlike kings before her, whose right to rule was rarely questioned. A woman on the throne faced an intricate and often fragile political landscape. Imagine the long corridors of the palace, their walls adorned with paintings of gods and kings, the air still except for the soft shuffle of sandals and the occasional murmur of voices. Within this world, male courtiers, generals, and priests watched closely, their loyalty often measured in cautious glances rather than open support. For the female pharaoh, every gesture, every decision was examined under this quiet scrutiny. Her power, though immense in theory, required careful negotiation. The political realm was dominated by men who held traditional views on leadership. To assert herself, she could not simply issue commands. She needed to weave alliances, build trust, and sometimes soften her stance with gestures of grace. This delicate dance was a constant part of her reign, never rushed, never forced, but steady and deliberate. Consider the subtlety of the court's atmosphere. Meetings might begin with the faint aroma of myrrh burning in braziers, the dim light casting slow-moving shadows across the faces of advisors. Here, political strategies were formed not only through words, but through unspoken understanding, a language of nods, silences, and veiled suggestions. The female pharaoh learned to listen closely, reading between the lines, aware that open confrontation could weaken her position. At times, she would rely on symbolic acts to assert her legitimacy. The pharaoh's traditional beard, usually worn by kings, became a tool of authority. This false beard, rigid and finely crafted, was a reminder that leadership in Egypt was traditionally masculine, even if the wearer was not. By adopting such symbols, she subtly reinforced her place, blending masculine iconography with her own presence. Yet power was not merely about image. Behind the scenes, alliances shifted like desert sands. Generals commanded armies, priests held spiritual sway, and nobles controlled wealth. A female ruler often found herself negotiating these forces with extra care. Loyalty was not guaranteed. It had to be earned daily. She needed to balance firmness with diplomacy, appearing both resolute and approachable. The palace itself was a stage for this political tightrope. Grand halls echoed with quiet conversations, the flicker of oil lamps casting elongated shadows on polished stone floors. Courtiers exchanged subtle glances and whispered counsel, aware that the smallest misstep could ripple through the fragile web of support. In this environment, the female pharaoh's reign was a constant exercise in measured patience. Despite these challenges, some female pharaohs displayed remarkable skill in navigating their courts. They cultivated networks of allies, rewarded loyalty with favors or positions, and carefully managed the flow of information. Their political acumen was a silent force, often hidden beneath the rituals and ceremonies, but no less effective. Still, the political tightrope remained narrow and unforgiving. The pressure to maintain authority without alienating powerful factions was relentless. For a female pharaoh, this tension was compounded by underlying doubts about her right to rule. Each decision, each public appearance, carried the weight of proving herself, not only to her people, but to a tradition reluctant to accept a woman's sovereignty. As twilight settled over the palace, the female pharaoh's political day came to a close, but the balance she maintained was far from over. The court's whispers and watchful eyes never fully rested, and neither could she. The political tightrope stretched endlessly forward, a steady challenge woven into the fabric of her reign. In this delicate space between power and vulnerability, the female pharaoh continued her quiet, unyielding work, each step a testament to her resilience, every moment a measured claim to a throne, still waiting to fully embrace her. The pharaoh's role in ancient Egypt extended beyond the palace walls and the yam ceremonies. It reached into the dust-choked air of distant battlefields. To rule was to protect the land, to lead armies into conflict when needed, and to embody the strength of the nation. This responsibility came naturally to male pharaohs, who were expected to don armor and wield weapons, symbols of power that spoke to their role as warriors. For a female pharaoh, however, this martial expectation presented a complex challenge. Imagine the wide, open plains where armies gathered, the dry earth faintly stirred by footsteps, the metallic glint of bronze weapons catching the sun, and the distant murmur of strategists discussing their plans. The scent of sweat mingled with the dry air, carried on a breeze that whispered of tension and uncertainty. Yet, the female pharaoh was rarely seen on this scene. The battlefield was not a place where her presence was easily accepted. Instead, she often had to rely on generals, trusted men who carried the visible mantle of military leadership. These commanders acted in her name, their banners fluttering as a reminder of the pharaoh's power, even if she remained distant. The pharaoh's role was sometimes reduced to a symbolic figurehead in warfare, her authority asserted through images and proclamations rather than direct action. This distance from the battlefield was not merely a matter of custom, but of perception. Warfare in ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with masculine ideals, strength, courage, and the physical exertion of combat. For a woman, particularly one in a position so charged with masculine symbolism, leading troops directly was both unusual and, in many eyes, inappropriate. The soldiers themselves, accustomed to male commanders, might have struggled to fully accept a female leader at the front lines. Despite these limitations, female pharaohs did not shy away from the symbolism of military power. They commissioned reliefs and statues depicting themselves wielding the crook and flail, traditional symbols of royal authority and protection. These images often showed them smiting enemies or standing victorious, reinforcing their role as defenders of Egypt's borders. Yet, such depictions were carefully crafted, blending familiar masculine imagery with their own feminine presence, creating a unique but sometimes uneasy visual language. The reality of military command for a female pharaoh was thus often a balance between presence and absence. The battlefield remained a place where her influence was felt more in strategy rooms than on horseback. The crackle of campfires and the rustling of leather armor belonged more to her generals than to her. Her strength was expressed through planning, negotiation, and delegation rather than direct confrontation. This arrangement had its drawbacks. Without direct control, the pharaoh depended heavily on the loyalty and competence of her commanders. Political intrigue could seep into the military ranks, and the absence of her personal presence might embolden rivals or rebellious elements. The tension between symbolic authority and practical command was a constant undercurrent. Back in the palace, the pharaoh would receive reports, the steady rhythm of footsteps approaching her chambers, the soft unfolding of maps across polished tables, the quiet murmur of advisors debating the best course. Here, she exercised control with precision, steering the course of conflict through counsel and decree rather than through the clang of weapons. The challenges of military command were part of a larger pattern, one with a female pharaoh as rule required adaptation and resilience. In a world shaped by expectations that linked power to masculine traits, she carved out a space that honored tradition while bending it gently to her reality. As night fell over the land, the sounds of distant encampments softened, the desert air cooling under a canopy of stars. The female pharaoh's role as protector of Egypt remained firm, though shaped by forces beyond her immediate control. Her strength was a quiet one woven through strategy and symbol, endurance and delegation. And so, the story of her reign continued, a delicate balance between the commanding presence expected of a warrior and the subtle reality of a woman leading an ancient kingdom from behind the scenes. In the quiet chambers of the royal palace, where delicate linens hung like whispers, and the scent of lotus flowers lingered softly in the air, another weight pressed upon the female pharaoh, one less visible than the crown or the throne, yet no less heavy. This was the burden of fertility and succession, a deeply rooted expectation that shaped much of her life and reign. Ancient Egypt, like many societies of the time, placed great importance on lineage. The continuity of the royal bloodline was a sacred trust, a thread connecting the divine past with the present and future. The pharaoh was not only ruler, but also progenitor, the living link ensuring that the kingdom's stability would endure beyond her own lifetime. For a woman on the throne, the pressure to produce an heir was both personal and political. Imagine the soft glow of oil lamps flickering over carved wooden furniture, the faint rustle of silk as the pharaoh moved through her private quarters. Here, away from the public eye, the delicate balance between power and expectation played out most keenly. Fertility was seen as a sign of divine favor, a blessing that affirmed her right to rule. Yet, with this blessing came immense pressure, an unspoken demand that she bear children, preferably sons, to secure the throne's future. The palace was a place where such hopes and anxieties mingled quietly. Physicians and priests offered their guidance. Rituals were performed to invoke the blessings of gods like Hathor and Isis, goddesses associated with motherhood and protection. The scent of incense filled the air, thick with promises and prayers, as if the very atmosphere could coax fertility from the fertile soil of the body. But fertility was never guaranteed, and the failure to produce an heir could undermine the pharaoh's authority. In a society where succession was paramount, a female ruler without a clear successor faced the shadow of doubt creeping slowly into the court. Courtiers might whisper of instability, factions could form, and rivals could seize on this uncertainty to challenge her rule. Moreover, the expectation to bear children was entwined with broader ideas about a woman's role, even one as powerful as the pharaoh. She was seen as both sovereign and mother, her body a vessel for the future of Egypt. This dual role added layers to her reign, intertwining political necessity with deeply personal trials. The experience of pregnancy and childbirth in ancient Egypt was filled with both hope and risk. Though the land was rich and the medical knowledge advanced for its time, complications were common, and the loss of children was a reality many faced. For the pharaoh, such losses would be felt not only as personal sorrow, but also as political setbacks, echoes of which rippled through the court and the kingdom. Succession itself was a delicate matter. While sons were preferred, daughters could sometimes inherit the throne, though often only under special circumstances. The female pharaoh needed to ensure that her chosen heir, whether son or daughter, was recognized and accepted by the court, the priests, and the people. This process involved ceremonies, public declarations, and sometimes strategic marriages to secure alliances. In the quiet moments between public duties, the female pharaoh would contemplate these responsibilities, aware that her reign's legacy depended not only on her actions, but on the fragile line of succession. The crown she wore was entwined with this silent expectation, a reminder that power was fleeting unless carefully preserved. As night settled over the palace, and the stars glimmered softly above the Nile's steady flow, the burden of fertility and succession rested gently but persistently on her shoulders. It was a weight she bore with quiet strength, a constant companion on the path of her reign. And so, the story of her rule continued, shaped not only by the grand ceremonies and the political games, but also by the intimate and enduring challenges of motherhood and legacy. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a political leader, but also the divine intermediary between the gods and the people. This spiritual role carried immense weight, steeped in rituals that reached back through centuries, echoing through the temples and the desert air. For a female pharaoh, navigating religious authority was a careful and often challenging task, one where the invisible threads of faith and tradition pulled strongly, weaving a delicate web of expectation. Imagine the vast temple complexes, their towering columns casting long shadows over smooth stone floors, the air heavy with the fragrant smoke of burning incense. The flickering light of oil lamps danced on walls covered in intricate hieroglyphs, each symbol a prayer, a story, or a command to the gods. Here, the pharaoh's role was both visible and symbolic, a ritual performance reaffirming cosmic order, or ma'at, which the gods had entrusted her to maintain. The position of the pharaoh as high priest was traditionally a male one. It was believed that the king, as son of Ra, embodied divine power, and his connection to the gods was absolute. For a woman to step into this sacred role unsettled long-standing conventions. Her authority, while recognized, was often seen through a filter tinted by gendered expectations. To many priests and religious officials, her presence was a delicate anomaly, necessary, yet puzzling. The female pharaoh was thus tasked with blending respect for these traditions with the practical need to command religious legitimacy. She appeared in ceremonies dressed in the regalia of kingship, the tall crown, the ceremonial beard, and the scepter symbols designed to evoke continuity and stability. In temple reliefs and statues, she was often depicted performing rituals that reaffirmed her divine right, offerings to gods, blessings for the land, and prayers for prosperity. Yet beneath this surface, the spiritual realm was fraught with subtle tensions. The religious elite, custodians of sacred knowledge and ritual, held significant influence. Their acceptance of a female ruler was not always wholehearted. Priests, steeped in tradition, sometimes viewed a woman's divine role as secondary or exceptional. This could affect the smooth functioning of religious ceremonies, the dissemination of royal decrees, and even public perception. The pharaoh's relationship with the priesthood required careful cultivation. Through patronage, appointments, and shared ceremonies, she sought to build alliances that strengthened her standing. The sacred offices were often filled with loyal supporters, balancing old customs with the evolving reality of her rule. In this way, religious authority became a subtle negotiation, part reverence, part political strategy. Consider also the personal dimension of faith for the female pharaoh. Beyond public ceremonies and formal rituals, her connection to the gods was intimate and profound. She would have sought guidance in quiet moments, the cool marble of temple floors beneath her feet, the distant chant of priests resonating softly through the halls. The gods were not distant forces, but active participants in her reign, their favor essential for the kingdom's well-being. Moreover, the female pharaoh sometimes emphasized her role as a goddess incarnate, linking herself to powerful female deities like Isis and Hathor. These associations helped soften the masculine edges of kingship and created a spiritual framework more inclusive of her unique position. Through this, she carved a space for her rule within the tapestry of Egyptian religion, an intricate balance of tradition and adaptation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over temple courtyards, the spiritual rhythm of Egypt continued, carried on by priests, worshippers, and the pharaoh herself. The divine mandate she held was a luminous thread, woven through every ritual, every prayer, every stone carved in reverence. And so, navigating religious authority was not simply a duty, but a nuanced art, an enduring element of her reign, quietly shaping the course of history beneath the timeless gaze of the gods. Beyond the stone walls of the palace and the sacred spaces of temples, the pulse of Egypt's cities and villages beat steadily, carried by the daily rhythms of life along the Nile. For the female pharaoh, the eyes of her people, farmers, artisans, traders, and priests, were an unseen yet ever-present force. Public perception shaped her reign almost as much as political maneuvering or religious ceremonies, casting a gentle but persistent shadow over her every action. Imagine the soft chatter in bustling market squares, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the warm Nile breeze, and the distant calls of merchants bartering their wares. Here, the common people absorbed the image of their ruler not through statues or royal decrees, but through stories passed in whispered conversations, through the tales told beneath starlit skies, and through the symbols that adorned temples and shrines. The female pharaoh's rule challenged long-standing ideas about leadership. In a culture where kings were traditionally men, her presence as a woman on the throne invited curiosity, admiration, and sometimes skepticism. Many looked to her as a living embodiment of Egypt's divine order, while others quietly questioned the naturalness of a female sovereign. This tension was never far from the surface. Public displays, ceremonial processions, festivals, and temple rituals became opportunities to affirm her legitimacy. These events were carefully designed spectacles, where her image was presented with grandeur and reverence. The rhythmic beating of drums, the shimmering colors of silks and gold, and the harmonious chants of priests formed a sensory tapestry that wove her rule into the fabric of everyday life. Yet beneath the pomp, the everyday whispers of the people carried a different cadence. Some may have doubted her ability to protect the land or to lead armies. Others might have feared instability, recalling past struggles when succession was unclear. Rumors, subtle and shadowed, could spread like the gentle current of the Nile, slow but persistent, shaping opinion in quiet but powerful ways. To meet these challenges, the female pharaoh's advisors and officials worked diligently to manage her image. Messages were crafted carefully, emphasizing continuity with past rulers and the divine favor she enjoyed. Public works, such as building projects and irrigation efforts, were highlighted as signs of a prosperous reign. These visible achievements helped soothe doubts, offering tangible evidence of her capability. Consider, too, the role of art and iconography in shaping public perception. Statues depicted her with traditional royal regalia, crown, beard, scepter, blending masculine symbols of power with her feminine form. Temple reliefs showed her performing sacred rituals, smiting enemies, or embracing gods, images designed to inspire confidence and reinforce her authority. Still, the female pharaoh remained acutely aware of the fragile nature of popular opinion. A single misstep, a failed harvest, a military setback, or a court intrigue exposed could sway sentiment. The weight of public perception was a quiet pressure, a steady presence that required vigilance and care. At times, the pharaoh may have found solace in the steady, unchanging rhythms of the land, the slow rise and fall of the Nile, the cycle of seasons, the soft rustle of papyrus reeds in the evening breeze. These natural patterns offered a comforting contrast to the shifting tides of human opinion. As twilight softened the edges of the bustling cities, and the voices of the day faded into a gentle hush, the female pharaoh's image lingered in the minds of her people, both as a symbol of strength and as a figure navigating the complex currents of acceptance. And so, the story of her reign was shaped not only by law and ritual, but by the subtle, ever-present force of public perception, a delicate dance beneath the warm Egyptian sun. Within the grand halls of the palace, behind high walls that caught the soft glow of the desert sun, the female pharaoh often faced a solitude few could fully understand. Power, while resplendent and commanding, also carried an inherent isolation, a quiet, persistent separation from the familiar world outside and from those who might walk beside her in less elevated roles. The palace itself was a world apart, its smooth stone corridors echoing softly with the footsteps of servants, guards, and courtiers. The air inside was tinged with the scent of fragrant oils, mingling with the coolness of shaded alcoves, where gentle breezes stirred the delicate curtains. Yet, beneath this serene atmosphere, the pharaoh's position placed her at a distance, not only physically, but also emotionally. Unlike kings before her, whose authority was often reinforced by the company of male relatives or trusted generals, the female pharaoh sometimes found herself navigating this realm of power with fewer close confidants who shared her experience. Relationships were often formal and strategic, shaped by the demands of statecraft and the watchful eyes of the court. The nature of her rule meant that trust was a scarce commodity. Those around her were advisors, officials, and nobles, each with their own ambitions and interests. The court was a delicate stage where loyalty and rivalry intertwined beneath the surface. To lead effectively, she had to maintain a careful balance, embracing counsel while guarding against manipulation or betrayal. The solitude of power could be felt in the quiet moments too. As the evening shadows lengthened and the palace settled into a hushed stillness, the pharaoh might reflect on the weight she bore alone. The crown, heavy with gold and precious stones, symbolized not only authority, but also the solitude that accompanied it. Isolation was further deepened by the expectations placed on her gender. In a society where kingship was tied to masculine ideals, her presence was often regarded as exceptional, rare, and remarkable, but also somewhat separate from the norm. This separation could lead to feelings of alienation, as the ordinary experiences of companionship and equality became distant memories. Yet, within this solitude, the female pharaoh also found moments of quiet strength. The palace gardens, with their soft rustle of palm fronds and the gentle murmur of water from stone fountains, offered small refuges where she could find calm. The texture of cool marble beneath her fingertips, the scent of blooming jasmine carried on a whispering breeze. These sensory details grounded her, providing comfort amid the complexities of rule. Her isolation was not merely a personal experience, but also a reflection of the unique challenges of female sovereignty in ancient Egypt. It shaped her decisions, her relationships, and the very manner in which she expressed authority. The need to appear strong, uncheckable, and divine often left little room for vulnerability or shared burdens. The solitude of power was thus a quiet companion, present in every decree issued, every ceremony performed, and every silent moment behind closed doors. It was a reminder that the throne, for all its grandeur, was a solitary seat won, with a female pharaoh balanced the weight of history, expectation, and destiny. As night deepened and stars emerged softly over the Nile, the palace rested in peaceful quiet, holding the presence of a ruler both mighty and alone, a figure shaped by strength, resilience, and the subtle ache of isolation. The palace was a place where every whispered word and subtle glance carried weight, a delicate dance of alliances and ambitions, unfolding beneath the polished stone floors and beneath the watchful gaze of painted gods. For the female pharaoh, the corridors of power were also corridors of intrigue complex, shifting and often quietly perilous. Imagine the soft rustle of fine linen robes as courtiers moved through shadowed galleries, the faint clink of jewelry, and the muted murmur of voices carefully lowered to avoid unintended ears. Within these walls, the court was a living organism, its pulse measured by loyalty, rivalry, and the ever-present desire for influence. Unlike the straightforward authority enjoyed by some male predecessors, a female ruler had to navigate a terrain marked by cautious acceptance and sometimes veiled opposition. Her gender added a layer of complexity to these court dynamics, prompting both support from those who admired her uniqueness and suspicion from those who questioned her legitimacy. The key figures at court, high officials, military commanders, priests, and royal family members each played their parts in this intricate performance. Loyalties were often conditional, built on shared interests that could shift with the changing tides of favor or fortune. Alliances were formed quietly in private chambers, sometimes sealed with gifts or promises, other times broken with cold calculation. The pharaoh herself was aware of this delicate balance. She needed to maintain the confidence of her inner circle while managing rival factions that might seek to exploit any perceived weakness. Her advisors were both guides and potential threats, their counsel shaped as much by personal ambition as by devotion to the throne. At times, intrigue took the form of subtle maneuvering, a whispered suggestion here, a withheld decree there, a carefully timed favor. Such actions could tip the balance of power within the court, influencing decisions about appointments, military campaigns, or religious rites. The female pharaoh's skill lay in reading these undercurrents, responding with measured actions that preserved her authority without escalating tensions. The dynamics of succession added another layer to court politics. The question of who would inherit the throne was not always straightforward, particularly when the pharaoh's children were young or when rival claimants existed. Court factions could align behind different heirs, each seeking to shape the future according to their interests. The female ruler's ability to manage these competing forces was crucial to the stability of her reign. Despite the ever-present undercurrents of ambition and rivalry, moments of genuine loyalty and collaboration also flourished. Trusted officials worked closely with the pharaoh to govern the kingdom, overseeing tax collection, agricultural projects, and law enforcement. Together, they maintained the complex machinery of state, ensuring that the Nile cycles continued to nourish the land and that Egypt as people thrived. In this environment, the female pharaoh's role was both that of a sovereign and a strategist. She needed to embody strength and grace, projecting confidence to quell doubts and inspire devotion. The crown she wore was more than a symbol, it was a tool in the subtle art of governance. As the day waned and shadows lengthened in the royal chambers, the quiet interplay of power continued behind closed doors. The palace was alive with intentions both spoken and unspoken, a world where every gesture mattered and where the female pharaoh's reign was shaped not only by law, but by the ever-shifting currents of court intrigue. And so, the story of her rule was woven from these delicate threads, a tapestry of power, caution, and quiet resilience beneath the timeless sky of Egypt. As centuries flowed like the eternal waters of the Nile, the reign of the female pharaoh settled into the fabric of history, sometimes celebrated, sometimes overshadowed, but never forgotten. Legacy, both a quiet echo and a powerful force, shaped how she was remembered by those who came long after her days had passed. Imagine the soft rustling of papyrus scrolls in the cool libraries of later eras, the faint scent of ink and dust blending with the warm light filtering through narrow windows. It was here, in these quiet places of learning and reflection, that scribes and scholars preserved her story, filtered through layers of time, interpretation, and changing values. The female pharaoh's legacy was a complex one. On one hand, she stood as a testament to possibility, a woman who wore the double crown, ruled with authority, and maintained the delicate balance of power in a male-dominated world. Her statues and monuments, carved in stone and gold, bore witness to her reign, capturing her image with serene dignity and divine symbolism. Yet history often treated her rule with ambivalence. Later records sometimes minimized her achievements or framed her as an exception, a deviation from the traditional order. The nuances of her governance, the challenges she faced, and the quiet strength she displayed could be lost amid the broad strokes of historical narrative. Legacy, in this sense, was not simply what she accomplished, but also how those accomplishments were perceived, remembered, and retold. The passing of time could soften the sharp edges of conflict, turning complex struggles into distant echoes. The female pharaoh became a figure both of admiration and mystery, her story inviting curiosity, but also caution. The monuments she left behind, temples rising softly against the desert sky, adorned with delicate carvings and offerings, served as silent reminders. Their cool stones absorbed the shifting light of dawn and dusk, standing steadfast even as empires rose and fell. These places offered a tangible connection to her reign, a space where the past whispered softly to the present. In everyday life, her influence extended beyond politics and religion. The subtle shifts she prompted in gender roles, the precedents she set for female authority, and the ways she navigated power left ripples that touched generations. Her story became part of Egypt's long, flowing narrative, a thread woven through tales of gods, kings, and people. Yet, the quiet legacy of her isolation, the burdens she bore in silence, and the delicate negotiations she made in the corridors of power remind us that history is never simply about triumph. It is also about endurance, complexity, and the many shades of human experience. As night falls gently over the Nile once more, the legacy of the female pharaoh remains a soft but enduring presence, like the gentle ripple of water under moonlight, shaping the course of history in ways both seen and unseen. And so, Her story continues not just in stone and scrolls, but in the quiet moments of reflection, the gentle unfolding of time, and the steady, unhurried flow of memory. As we draw this journey to a close, it is worth pausing to reflect on the path walked by the female pharaohs, figures who stood at the crossroads of tradition and change, burdened with a crown heavier than gold, yet radiant with resilience. Their reigns were marked by layers of complexity, quietly woven into the vast tapestry of Egypt's history. They navigated the intricate balance between power and expectation, authority and isolation, reverence and suspicion. Through each challenge, be it the strict confines of gender roles, the vigilant eyes of the priesthood, or the ever-shifting tides of court intrigue, they held their place with a measured grace, a steady hand that guided a civilization along the river's timeless course. Imagine the cool hush of dawn settling over the desert, the first light filtering softly through temple columns, touching the carved faces of gods and rulers alike. It was under such gentle light that these women stepped forward, embodying divine will and mortal strength. Their statues, etched in stone and gold, remain silent witnesses, reflecting the calm dignity with which they bore their burdens. Yet beyond the monuments and recorded deeds lies a more subtle story, one of quiet perseverance amid solitude, of leadership that often went unseen or misunderstood. Their legacy is not only in the laws passed or temples built, but in the silent resilience that allowed them to govern in a world shaped largely by men. This quiet resilience offers a different kind of lesson, not of triumphant conquest, but of steady endurance. It invites us to consider how power can be both isolating and empowering, how authority may come wrapped in solitude, and how history often remembers the surface while the true texture lies beneath. As night falls once more over the sands and the Nile, the stories of these female pharaohs linger like the soft glow of stars, subtle, steady, and enduring. Their reigns remind us that history's greatest figures are not always those who shout loudest, but those who hold firm through the whispering winds of time. So, as you settle into the calm embrace of the evening, let the story of the female pharaohs drift gently through your thoughts. Let their quiet strength and the vastness of ancient Egypt as timeless landscape guide your mind toward rest and reflection. And with that, may your night be peaceful, your dreams steady, and your heart comforted by the gentle rhythm of history's enduring flow.